So I've made this mistake once before, full effort, gone over the line, gone onto the plateau, chilled off, sat there for a minute or two, and then rolled downhill, and it only stopped my time when I started rolling down. So I was really upset when I got to the bottom.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Odd Tandem. We had a great chat today, Yenzi, of one of many things, but she was the first world e-sport world champion back in 2022. She's been incredibly successful with her business, Roca Cobra, down in just outside of Girona. And she's really looking forward to the World Championships in Rwanda this year. What did you think about our chat today with Ashleigh Moolman-Pasio?
It was absolutely fantastic. And also it one more time confirmed one of the biggest differences between men's and women's cycling is a lot of these women start later but have a real education. She is a chemical engineer. She finished her university, she got the diploma. So when she was in the chat room with us, she was probably the smartest person in the chat room. So I absolutely love talking to her.
There is no doubt about that, Yenzi. But one of the cool things that she mentioned was that she's already done her recon for the World Championships in Rwanda. Obviously, I wanted to ask her that question, but I knew she wouldn't respond because maybe she doesn't want her competition listening to our podcast and learning what's going on there. But I am sure excited to find out. So sit back and relax and listen to our great conversation today with Ashleigh Moolman-Pasio. All right. Welcome, Ashleigh Moolman-Pasio, to The Odd Tandem.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Well, you just returned from the UAE tour. How was your first race of the season?
Well, I have to be honest. The crosswinds in the desert are another beast altogether. It was my first time racing in the UAE, and I have to admit, it was really tough. We had stage 2 with really crazy crosswinds. I think it was 50 kilometers per hour, It was hard, I must say. I usually thought I was pretty good at crosswinds, even for a small rider. Like echelon riding is something that I'm not afraid of. But it's a total different ball game in the desert with these really wide roads that just go in one direction for kilometers and kilometers. I can say I've ticked it off, been there, done that, good to get the season going.
Before we dive deeper into your stories and history, we got a series of 4 quick-fire questions, okay? Mm-hmm. Are you ready for them?
Yes, I'm ready.
All righty. So, would it be Esports World Championships or the Commonwealth Games bronze medal?
Esports World Championships.
What would be your favorite race?
My favorite race is actually Flèche Wallonne.
Good choice. What is your favorite country that you have traveled or raced in?
Oh, that's a good question.
It could be your home country as well. Feel free.
I'm actually going to say Eritrea, surprisingly enough. I raced the African Continental Champs there in 2011, and it was a really, really amazing experience.
And what is your spirit animal?
Ooh, I'd say a horse.
All right. Jens has a huge love for animals, so I'm not surprised he asked that question today. But going back to the UAE tour, can you explain the challenges of riding in the desert in the crosswinds? Because not all of us experience that. What's the technique? What's a do? What's a don't?
Well, crosswinds are always pretty tough because, it's just literally the direction that the wind's coming from. What happens is that, teams or riders go onto the opposite side of the road and they really ride as close as they can to the edge of the road, making as little space as possible for the other riders to get slipstream in the wheel. So that's just the dynamics of crosswind riding. However, usually, like my experience of riding crosswinds or echelons has been in, I'd say probably Holland is probably my biggest experience. And the difference in Holland is it's really technical, it's narrow roads, the direction of the road is changing a lot. So usually it's a massive fight to, let's say, take the corner, and then you hit a really narrow section and they're crosswinds. But once you get in the echelon, you're pretty safe to say that you kind of stay there quite easily, because the rest will just drop really fast because they can't move up. There isn't space. But in the UAE, in the desert, we have these really, really big, wide roads. And they go literally in one direction for, like, let's say 20 kilometers. So you have 20 kilometers. And then sometimes we go, for example, 20 kilometers one way. We do a U-turn and we go 20 kilometers in the opposite direction. So it means you have 40 kilometers of crosswinds, but okay, maybe a little bit sometimes head cross and sometimes tail cross. That's the only difference. But because the roads are so wide, you just find that you're fighting for so much longer, because it's not decided so quickly, because teams can move up on the side. They obviously have to work really hard to move up in the crosswinds on the side, but they then try get back into the echelon. And so this like fight to get into the echelon rolling can be pretty crazy. And so, yeah, that was my experience. It was a lot harder because you're fighting for much longer. And then, as I said, it can be like 40 kilometers, for example, of relentless crosswinds. So, yeah, it was a real challenge.
Would you say it is the same amount of bumping shoulders using the elbow in men's cycling and women's cycling? Or would the boys be more gentlemen, or the women more ladies? Or is it, it's sport. It's just about get that position in the crosswind or around that last turn towards the finish line. You think it's the same physical need to touch and push and bounce like in men's cycling?
I mean, it's difficult for me to say exactly, because it's not that I've ever ridden in the men's peloton, but I would imagine, or my feeling is, hearing you speak and saying like pushing and elbowing, I'd say it's more physical for the men. I don't feel that we are pushing and elbowing as much, but it still is a big fight. It's just that we're just being cut off rather than actually pushing someone, if that makes sense. And maybe I feel like, yeah, maybe the woman, we kind of back off a bit sooner, because especially a rider like myself, I'm small. So I get quite intimidated when a big rider kind of just barges in front of me. I'm not going to try and kind of wrestle with her or bump heads or push her aside. So I think it's more physical in men's cycling than it is in women's cycling, but it still is just as much a fight, if that makes sense.
Ooh, you're giving me PTSD, because that was I hated battling in the crosswinds. I mean, you always think you can be that last one, and then you're sitting there fighting, and then all of a sudden you explode and everyone jumps around you and you're piped off the back. Don't miss those days, do we, Yenzi?
No, we don't. No, we don't. And there also, probably you had that as well, Ashleigh. In the morning, every single team has the same team meeting. Today's crosswinds at kilometer 17.5. We have a 90-degree corner. You need to be top 20.
Exactly.
Every single rider in the peloton knows that. Every single one wants to be top 20. No, I do not miss these fights. But it was like that for you, I suppose, right? Racing last week there, right? Everybody got Google Maps. Everybody knows where the wind comes from, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, the challenging thing really was that on stage 2, it was from kilometer 0. So we were all getting ready, like in our vans. We don't have the luxury of team buses. When we were in the UAE, they put up like tables and sort of tents for us, but the wind was so bad already that we couldn't even really sit outside. So we were all squashed up in our vans and hearing the wind blowing outside, and the anxiety is just building, because I think there was maybe 1 kilometer of neutral, but it was full gas, full sprint. It wasn't neutral at all. And then from kilometer 0, it was just carnage. So yeah, it was so stressful and so tough. And then, yeah, I didn't make it into the front split. So I had to work really hard, thankfully, with my teammates to get back. But at that stage, 5 riders had gone off the front, and yeah, we never saw them again until the end of the race. And at the end of the day, that was a big deciding factor. So Lisa Longa Borghini was in at a front split of 5 riders. So she already had a massive advantage just from the crosswinds. And the next day was the Jebel Hafit mountaintop finish. But we still had crosswinds that day. So thankfully not from kilometer 0. So it was a little bit more calm. We could warm up at least for it. I think it was about 80 kilometers before the crosswind started. And then you just burn match after match, trying to fight to be in those crosswinds. And I must say, as a climber, this isn't an experience I'm so used to. So once I hit the Jebel Hafit, I had burnt so many matches, I just didn't have anything left anymore. So I couldn't put in the performance that I would usually be able to on a mountaintop finish. So it's just a totally different dynamic. Although it's a mountaintop finish, we generally found that the sort of bigger, more powerful riders rose to the top and were on the podium, and the real classic climbers, we took a big knock and we didn't find ourselves on the podium as we hoped to be.
Well, in the end, you did have a teammate, Kimberly Pinnar, who finished 3rd overall. So it's not like you guys
Exactly.
from your team came around empty-handed, right? But let's go to from where there are crosswinds to where there are no crosswinds, but it's still a very specialized sport. You were the 2020 World e-bike champion. Back then it was on Zwift. I think it's changed platforms now. How did that come about? I know it was the middle of the pandemic or during the pandemic and stuff, but tell us a little bit about your experience in the first ever World e-bike championships back then.
Well, let's maybe just correct that. So it's e-sports, because e-bike would insinuate
true.
that I have an engine in my bike, which I didn't. Yeah, but so it all came about really because of the pandemic. So I live in Spain, and there was a really hard lockdown in Spain. So although I'm South African, my home really is Spain, and it did kind of cross my mind as the pandemic was sort of coming very fast. Do I go back to South Africa? Because maybe I'll be in a better position if I go back to South Africa. But the reality is, Spain is home. We own a business here. We own a really big property here. So it wasn't that simple just to pack my bags and head back to South Africa. So we decided to sit it out and to stay in Spain. But yeah, it was a pretty hard lockdown. And I had a choice that I either kind of just felt sorry for myself and sat on the couch and lost all my fitness, or that I just take the challenge head on and get onto the indoor trainer. And at that time, I didn't enjoy indoor training. I really avoided it at all costs because, I'm quite a perfectionist when I do interval training. And my issue with indoor trainer was that I could just never get the same numbers. So, if I had an interval set, I was always just killing myself to try to get those numbers. And I found it very frustrating. But because of the pandemic, I had no other option. So I just tried my best to embrace them. I must say I was pretty lucky because the year before we had hosted Zwift at our sports hotel, Rock Cycling, for a camp that they hosted here. A whole lot of riders won a spot to come in real life to have a training camp with the Zwift coaches. And so I had already been kind of exposed to Zwift. And when they left one really good setup. So we had a big screen TV, a great Tax Neo trainer. I had everything I needed to have the best experience, but I hadn't really used it. And so when the pandemic hit, I put my bike on the indoor trainer, I got everything connected, and I tried to embrace the virtual world. And it took me a little bit of time because the first sessions were just as frustrating as before. I had crazy muscle DOMs. But as the days and weeks passed by and I did more and more sessions on the indoor trainer, my body started to adapt to the new stimulus, the external resistance, and having to push against the resistance. And I started to see my numbers improving. I started having a really positive experience on Zwift because although I was locked in my home, I could still have a really social experience riding, probably more social than ever before, because I could ride with people from all around the world, all different abilities, because on Zwift, it's possible, for example, to do a workout and to create banded ride where it doesn't matter what everyone's holding, you stay together. So I started really enjoying the virtual world, and I started seeing the potential of the virtual world. not only for exposure for my current sponsors, but also for our cycling tourism business because we couldn't have any guests. And that's what opened my mind initially. And then because competition couldn't happen in the real world, Zwift started putting on competition for the elite peloton. And I was very good at it. I was winning, I was doing really, really well. And so when the opportunity came to race the first ever esports world champs, I really jumped at the opportunity because as a South African, it's really difficult for me to stand a chance to win a world title on the road because I'm hugely outnumbered. I don't really have team support, so everything has to go perfectly on the day for me to win that title. But when it came to esports, I knew that I was arguably the best in the world at esports because I'd been dominating. I knew that I just needed to put in my usual performance and that nothing else, unless I had to drop out, nothing else could stand in my way of winning. And so, yeah, I was really motivated, really confident, and yeah, happy to win the world title. It felt really good.
So, for our listeners and viewers, for a better understanding, obviously, when we listened to you, you were alone in your house. Where were the other competitors in South America, in Australia, in Japan? And how was that connected? Did you see every one of them on screen, or they had these Swift avatars? And how would they check your bike adjustments? And is there any doping control or like a podium ceremony? How would all that work?
Yeah, so that's a good question. It's very different to racing in the real world. It's actually like the exact opposite. So when you're racing, you're in your own home and you can't see your competition in real life. So you're really just seeing the avatars on the screen. That I have a really big screen. I think that this is really important to enjoy the experience of virtual cycling because you really feel immersed if you have a big TV and it feels just a bit more engaging. So I had a really big screen, but I can see all the avatars. I mean, you could potentially also be looking at the real life images of the other riders because it was compulsory for us to have a video recording of us on the bike. So you can also look at that and kind of see if a rider seems to be struggling or not. But generally speaking, you're kind of in your own bubble and you're focusing more on like your own performance. So, I mean, like in the real world, you do a route recon, you get to know the route really well, where the places are that would suit you. So where the steepest part of the climb is, where to put an attack in. So that's something that you almost have to be even more prepared with because you really have to have your game strategy. And I feel like it's more you, yourself, and your effort rather than watching the others. Although it is important, of course, if someone attacks, you do have to try follow. It's quite a lot going on. You know, you have to be watching the screen, you have to be thinking about your strategy. But then at the same time, in the real world where you're so removed from your loved ones, and, you know, for example, maybe your husband or your partner or your parents who might be really supportive in your process of preparing for a race, and then they're nowhere to be seen while you're racing, or they're on the start line, but you can't really engage with them. That's the exact opposite with esports. So with esports, your loved ones or your coach or your husband can be right next to you, encouraging you, helping you with the tactics, helping you sort of read the screen, read what the other avatars are doing. So that's the exact opposite, which I think is kind of special in a way. And then when it comes to doping control, yes, we have to be on water to be able to race. So that is one of the requirements of being able to race the World Championships is that you have to be on water, and they do dope control. And then
one quick WADA for our viewers is the World Anti-Doping Organization, right?
Yeah, so it's exactly the same.
Just to be clear that everybody understands what the WADA is. Sorry for interrupting. Back to you,
No.
Ashleigh.
Exactly, 100%. So that's a good thing as being a road professional because I am on the whereabouts program. So I have to provide my whereabouts every day to be tested randomly whenever they want. So that was ticked off easily. And then it's quite a protocol as well in terms of checking your equipment. So usually we have to do a power test on the indoor trainer that we'll be using to race, so that they can verify the trainer and make sure that everything is lines up. So what you're doing on the indoor trainer correlates to what other power numbers you've been producing. So you provide your best 5 minutes, 1 minutes, 10 minutes, or, they have a whole profile that they expect you to provide to them, as well as the equivalent efforts in real life using Strava or Training Peaks. So you have to provide that data as well. And then on the race day, you have to do a whole video where you weigh yourself. You have to have another weight, let's say 5 kilogram weight, so that they can make sure that the scale is properly calibrated. So you, for example, have to put on the defined weight, film that, show that it's reading that weight, take it off, then you get on, film that, show the weight, then you get off, then you get on with the weight. So it's quite a protocol. You also have to do a video to show your height, because height also is a part of the algorithm in terms of determining how the avatar moves. So yeah, it's quite intense, but of course very important to make sure that nobody is cheating.
Yeah, pretty technical stuff, and people take it really, really serious. But I have a question? I read somewhere that in 2022, at the end of 2022, you were thinking of retirement, but here you are, still racing on the road. I think you have a contract through 2026. Was there something coming out of, that pandemic period where you kind of felt like, okay, I've had enough, and then suddenly something changed? Or what was the story behind that, if it's at all correct?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. I got into professional cycling a bit later in life, so I only discovered my talent while I was studying at university. So I first completed my university degree before I came over to Europe to race. So I was already 23 when I first came to Europe to start racing. So I'm quite young in terms of cycling years, but maybe not as young as I'd like to be in actual years. But anyways, that was, I still have a lot to give to the sport because I feel I'm still young. But at the same time, as I was getting a bit older, I was thinking about life beyond cycling. I set up a business with my husband here in Europe, in Spain, just outside of Jerome, that we started a cycling tourism business and a hotel called Rocacorba Cycling. And, the general sort of mentality in cycling is that if you want to be the best, you have to eat, sleep, dream cycling. You can't do anything else. But, having this business going, I'm not working day to day in the business, but I am involved strategically and at a higher level. And I started thinking, well, if I want to be more involved in the business, I have to stop riding my bike because it's not compatible to do both. But through the pandemic and 2021, I started to realize that, I was doing pretty well, still cycling and being involved in the business. I was handling both of those things pretty well. But the one thing that was still not quite aligning was, maybe I wasn't particularly happy in the team that I was in at the time. So it was quite exhausting. I was in SD Works. It's a great team. It's the best team in the world, but it's a very competitive environment. It wasn't really the best fit for me as a person. So it was a very exhausting environment to be in. And that's when I started to feel like, okay, maybe it's time to hang up the bike. But during the course of 2021, a very exciting opportunity came about with the AG Insurance Sudal team, which was a better fit for me. It was about, development as well as high performance. So having an elite team, but also having a Devo team, and the opportunity arose for me to be a leader, but also to be a mentor and to start sort of paying it forward. And this was an opportunity that really grabbed my attention. And so I thought, okay, well, I'll do it for another year. So 2023 to see what I can give to this new project. And I just fell in love with it. It's a great environment. It fits very well. It's kind of like a family, but it's still very professional. And so, yeah, I just realized I really still love racing my bike. I have the ability to do, to have a business and to race at the same time. I have the capacity to do so. Women's cycling is just continuing to take steps forward, with the Tour de France Femme avec Swift, the exposure that we're getting, the salaries are increasing. So, yeah, here I am, still riding my bike. And yeah, for another 2 years.
Age is just a number, right? And since Bobby and me, we are 53 years old, we pretend that 53 is the new 30. There we go. But before we go maybe back to talk more about your education and university, explain more about the business, the hotel, the cycling hotel you have. Where is it? What's the name? What's the webpage? You do weekend trips? You do 1 week or 10-day trips? Do people get a bike fit? Do people get to bring their bike, or they can rent the bike from you? Explain a little more about that, and so that people know where to look if you ever want to go on a next bike holiday.
Yeah, so our cycling hotel and business is called Rocacorba Cycling. So we are situated about 25, 30 minutes outside of Girona in a town called Banyoles, and at the foot of the Rocacorba climb. So that's where our name comes from. Rocacorba is a famous climb in the area. It's arguably the toughest climb in the Girona area, and a lot of the pros use it, especially to sort of test their form before the Grand Tours. So it's really the climb where the QOM and the KOM is highly contested and very, very well known. So yeah, when we settled in this area in 2012. It originally going to Italy when we first came to Europe, but kind of just never really found a community there. So we started looking a little bit further, and we heard about Girona. But my husband and I, both being sort of more kind of small town people, we didn't want to go into the city. We like to be close to the water. So we settled in Banyoles, and very quickly became acquainted with the Rocacorba climb, which became sort of a big part of my progression as a pro cyclist. It was the climb that I used to measure my form, my progress. It's where I do my intervals very often. It's a big part of my career. And when we decided that we wanted to settle in Spain and create a future for ourselves here beyond pro cycling, we started looking for a property because we had in mind that we wanted to do a sports hotel and cycling tourism business because, Girona is just such a popular place for people to come and ride their bikes. And it was just incredible. The first property that the estate agent brought us to look at was the property that we now call our home and our business, and it's literally situated just at the base of Rocacorba. So it was meant to be like perfect synergy. My favorite climb, I'm the queen of the mountain, and the perfect location for a sports hotel. So that's what it's called. We are situated on a farm, I'd say, like a small farm, basically. It overlooks the town of Banyoles and the lake. So it's quite a unique place. You feel like you're in the countryside, but you're really close to the city of Banyoles and the restaurants and the shops. So it's a really great location. It's a big property. We have a couple of buildings. We have a big farmhouse, which is more like a hotel where you have ensuite bedrooms and a restaurant to eat all your meals at. But we also have 2 villas. One is a 5-bedroom villa and one is a 3-bedroom villa. So people can kind of choose, do they want to come and stay here as a hotel guest and be fully catered? Do they want to take a villa with some friends, do some self-catering, eat some meals with us? Do they want to bring their family and their kids along? So it's quite a kind of unique business. We offer a solution for everyone. So we really specialize in bespoke cycling experiences. Sometimes we have big groups that book out the entire property, and we take care of absolutely everything. We can do anything from bike rental, massages, all the meals. We have great chefs who cook in our restaurant. We have bike guides, locals who really know the area and can take you to all the best places and all the best coffee stops. Or you can just come as a couple, rent a room in our hotel, bring your own bike if you like, and do your own thing. So it's very much a unique and bespoke experience. And then sometimes what we find is people come as a group, they really love it, they see the potential of bringing their family, and they return in the summer, they take the villa with their kids, their wife, maybe even their parents, so they can look after the kids when they go out riding, and they just have a great family holiday here. So yeah, it's a really cool spot.
I have a quick question about the climb, the Roca Corba climb, because I've heard about it for years from the OG residents that moved there before it became the cycling mecca that it is today. You mentioned that you're the QOM. Do you know who? Well, tell us a little bit about the climb. How long is it? We know that you have the QOM, and I'd be curious if you knew who had the KOM.
Yeah, so I do. I have to think very carefully what his name is, though. But anyways, let's go to the time first. It is technically a 12K climb, but the QOM and KOM segment is actually just over 9Ks. So the first part of the climb, if you're really looking at the entire climb, is very gradual. So it's not really the part that is contested as such. When we start our effort for the QOM or KOM, it's literally you cross a little bridge and you head into the trees, and that's where the real climb starts. The first 3Ks are a bit more sort of, more of a power climb. It's a really good quality surface road. It's kind of more gradual, has a little bit, some steep sections with some switchbacks, but it's nothing too crazy. And then you hit a bit of a kind of plateau and a little bit of a downhill section, which is about a kilometer long. And then after that, it goes up and it's steep, and it stays steep pretty much the entire way. So that's the real challenging part of the climb. You get one little respite again at 1.8 Ks to go, where there's a big field and a mast, which is a little bit flat and a little bit downhill again, and then it kicks up for the last 1.8 Ks. So the secret of the QOM or the KOM on this particular climb is that you really have to control yourself in those first 3 kilometers, because, you start the climb, it's a power climb, you're feeling strong, you're feeling excited. And if you go too hard there, you are going to pay for it at the end, because those last 1.8 kilometers are really, really tough. So a climber like myself who likes to climb out of the saddle, for example, I really need to try and save myself for those last 1.8K so that I can get out the saddle and maximize on my, what suits me, my strength. But if I've gone too hard in the beginning, then I'm not going to be able to do that at the end. So it's really a climb that you have to pace well, and then just go full gas to the end. An important thing with this climb is don't stop where the Strava segment line, because it is a line painted on the road. But if you stop there, inevitably the Strava it doesn't pick up that you've stopped, because there's a plateau, like a platform that you can go and stand on, and it's technically lower than the line. So I've made this mistake once before, full effort, gone over the line, gone onto the plateau, chilled off, sat there for a minute or two, and then rolled downhill. And it only stopped my time when I started rolling down. So I was really upset when I got to the bottom. So the important thing is that you go all the way to the fence. So there's a fence where there's a big tower, obviously stopping you from going to the tower. But it's really important to go all the way to the fence.
That's so funny how intricate and technical those little segments are these days.
So who has the men's, wasn't that the next question? Who has the men's KOM, Bobby?
It's changed quite a lot. Like James Knox had it for a while. I think even Jay Vine has had it. And more recently, it's also one of the Zwift Academy racers who has it. But the name has left my head.
No problem.
I'm going to have to think about it. But yeah, it changes quite a lot in the men. So it's highly contested and it keeps changing. Whereas I've had the QOM for, I'd say, a good 8 or 9 years. So yeah, I've really claimed it, and I'd improved my own time over the course of the years. But yeah, no one's managed to take it off me just yet. So touch wood.
Touch wood, indeed. One thing we noticed, a big difference very often between men's and women's cycling is that the women go through some proper education before. Men normally start cycling when they're 18, they just about finish high school, and then they off to travel the world and become a professional athletes. For women, seems to be different. What was your story there? You mentioned you went to university, you wanted to finish your degree. What was that about, or what did you study, and how did it go?
Yeah, so I actually studied chemical engineering. So it
Wow.
was a pretty tough degree. At school, I always really loved sport, and I played kind of the school sports at the time in South Africa, which were things like field hockey, tennis, a bit of athletics. And I was good, but I wasn't the best. So instead of being in the first team, I was often in the second team, and never really found the sport that I truly excelled in. So yeah, as a young child, I dreamt of going to the Olympic Games, and I used to watch the Olympics every time it happened, and with awe and dreaming to one day represent my country. But once I finished school, I was also an academic, so I got 7 distinctions. And once I finished school, I thought, okay, well, that's sports done. I'm gonna have to focus on academics now. And so I went to study chemical engineering. But it was during my time at university that I met my husband, Carl, and he was really into sport at the time. So he was a triathlete representing South Africa, and I was really intrigued at what he was doing. It really fascinated me. So, of course, I first gave triathlon a try, tried to follow in his footsteps, but it didn't go so well. I'm not a very fast swimmer, so I didn't get a good start. And I was always chasing, on the bike and on the run. I was pretty good at those two disciplines, but yeah, I was never going to be good enough with my swim. So anyways, long story short, I got a couple of running injuries. I tried a bit of duathlon, combining the cycling and the running, but yeah, kept getting running injuries. And so eventually I was forced to focus more on the cycling. And very quickly, my husband noticed my talent, my potential. He immediately noticed my power to weight ratio. And so he really started encouraging me to ride my bike. So I joined the university team. I used to train a lot with the guys, actually, with my husband. I really always try to challenge and stay with them. And so, yeah, I very quickly improved and got better and better. And from sort of racing university championships and winning that to racing the local leagues and winning that. And then, going on to the national level of cycling and winning the national championships. And then I got the opportunity in my final year at university to head over to France in September to race the Tour of Ardèche, which still exists. And it's one of the hardest tours because it includes a lot of the really hard sort of climbs in the Ardèche region of France. And I raced there and I absolutely fell in love with European cycling. It was just that much challenging, more challenging than South Africa. And I decided that as soon as I finish my degree, I'm going to head over to Europe and try to make it as a pro cyclist. And so in 2010 was my first year racing in Europe. And it was a really, really tough learning curve because I broke my collarbone 3 times in the space of 1 year in my first year. But yeah, it didn't stop me. And yeah, I just grew from strength to strength over the years. And here I am, still racing my bike.
So from starting in 2010, starting this business, having some up and downs, having some injuries, you've been through quite a interesting period for women's cycling, So when you first came in, I'd be kind of curious to hear when you first came into the sport, and then just this hockey stick of a ramp that women's cycling has had the last, kind of since the pandemic when you look at it. So can you really point to the state of women's cycling, past, current, and then maybe even give us your ideas on the future of women's cycling?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's changed a lot since I first started. So when I first started in 2010, I wasn't paid a salary. I was here purely on passion and determination. At I don't know, living on top of someone's garage in an apartment with a kitchen inside of my cupboard scenario. And to now, owning a business and a massive property and earning a really good salary through cycling. So I've really experienced it all. In the early days, it was very amateur. We didn't have buses. We just literally had the team cars, maybe a kind of a caravel or something like that. We were changing on the side of the road before the races. It was really, really basic. And from year to year, things started improving. I mean, the big challenge was, of course, TV exposure. In the first part of my career, TV exposure was almost non-existent unless it was the World Championships or the Olympic Games. So those were the real pinnacle events. So, family, friends, fans, they had to be uber fans to really follow what you were doing. So like results on paper were pretty much the only way of measuring performance. So of course that also meant that the racing was quite amateur. If the results on paper is the only way of measuring performance, then how do you really get teamwork to take place? So, but as as the years went on, I must say, I initially also was quite frustrated by the fact that women's cycling, there was so much inequity. I came from studying a male-dominated degree like engineering, and there I had a totally different experience where, as male and female engineering students, we treated each other as equals, we worked together, we got the same treatment and opportunities. And now I found myself in cycling where it was the exact opposite. It was polar opposites. We had hardly anything as women cyclists, and we're just trying to kind of make ends meet. And obviously men's cycling was, on a totally different spectrum. So I found this quite frustrating. And to be honest, that's partly why I actually started Rocket Corber Cycling. So even in 2018, when we started the business, TV exposure was not the norm. So I kind of thought, well, if I had a cycling tourism business, maybe that's the way of kind of creating a fan base, because if people come and stay at our hotel and they see my stuff and they see that I'm a pro, they meet me, maybe they're more inclined to follow women's cycling. So that was kind of also part of my thought process. But as you quite rightly said, the COVID pandemic was almost the turning point. So obviously through the years, things started to improve, and maybe we started to get camper vans instead of just having a caravel. And some teams started to get the odd bus because it was compulsory to have a highlights package for our races. These are the things that rules started changing within the UCI, but it was still, we still didn't have the Tour de France. And that to me, or to all of us, we realized, to really see change in our sport, we needed the Tour de France, because the Tour de France is the one race that everybody knows about. If you meet someone on the side of the road and you say you're a pro cyclist, the first question they're going to ask you is, do you race the Tour de France? Anyways, the COVID pandemic hit, and without being able to race in real life, the tour approached Zwift to talk about doing a virtual Tour de France. And Zwift have always prioritized equality. From the onset, that's their principle, and they stick by it. So when the ASO approached them to do a virtual Tour de France, they agreed on one term, that they would be equal for the women as well. So during the COVID pandemic, where everyone's stuck in their houses, biggest challenge for the entire world, it was the first time that the women's peloton had a true taste of equality and being associated with the Tour de France. We had the Le Tour, or what did they call it beforehand? We had a one-day race, but it was not...
Not L'Etape de Tour.
No.
Le course presented by Le Tour. There was a special name, right? There was that crit on the
Exactly.
Champs-Élysées.
So it wasn't even, we weren't even associated actually with the Tour de France name. It had its own name, So for the first time ever in 2020, on the virtual platform of Zwift, we had exact equality, equal exposure, the same distance, same number of stages, and it was the virtual Tour de France.
La course was the word. La course.
La course, exactly. You're right. And this for me was the game changer, because by having this on Zwift and ASO seeing how well it performed, we got the same TV numbers, people were watching, they were interested. That was almost the turning point, because the ASO started to realize, wow, okay, women's cycling can also make money. And therefore, they started to kind of have an appetite for it. And yeah, Zwift put their money where their mouth was, and were the first title sponsor for the Tour de France Femme avec Zwift. So to me, that was the real turning point. And the Tour de France has really changed the game in women's cycling. We now have, we have all our races are live on TV. People are aware of all the stars of women's cycling. We have so many more sponsors who are interested at putting their money in. Salaries have doubled, tripled. I mean, it's crazy. From the COVID pandemic, the growth of women's cycling just accelerated tenfold.
And cycling in general also became bigger and better, and also more international. Binyam Girmay being one of the superstars on the men's cycling, with taking the green jersey. Now this year we will have the first ever World Championships, right? On African soil, on the African continent, in Kigali. You fancy going there? Are you qualified already, or you want to go? And tell us maybe a little bit about the importance. It's got to have the impact on basically African country to have the World Championships on their own continent.
Yeah, so the Kigali World Champs in Rwanda is really, really special. I'm definitely looking forward to it. Of course, I'm pretty certain I will go, because I don't have all that much competition when it comes to selection. So I'm quite lucky in that respect. I've actually been already to Kigali. I've ridden the course, so I have a very good idea of what to expect. Of course, at the moment, cycling is very much a European sport. It's really, really difficult for talented cyclists outside of Europe to make it as a pro, because there's just so many challenges, so much red tape. Like the first thing to talk about is visas, for example. Just to get a visa to come and be able to spend more than 3 months racing in Europe is a big challenge for anyone outside of Europe, and especially for riders coming from Africa. So it's really, really important for cycling to globalize, to kind of bring cycling to the people, because for sure there's a lot of talent in Africa. I've seen that, racing in Eritrea in 2011, for example. I mean, it's insane how popular cycling is in Eritrea, and the same in Rwanda. When we race there, the crowds that come out on the side of the road to watch the racing, to support their heroes. Cyclists are big heroes in these countries, and we've seen this with Binyam Girmay. I mean, whenever he's racing in Europe, there are always Eritrean fans, on the sides of the road cheering him on, and he's like a hero in his country. So I experienced this firsthand in 2011, where when the Eritrean riders cross the finish line and they win, it's like football matches in Europe. They get picked up by the fans and carried, and there are people like celebrating on rooftops in trees to be able to see it. A woman blessing the roads, because they're quite religious. It's just insane. So Rwanda is going to be really, really special, I think, for people to experience the passion that Africa has for cycling. But of course, it's going to be different. There's going to be, some challenges maybe that the European peloton aren't so accustomed to. Africa is a little bit more chaotic than Europe. There are things that sort of kind of can, animals can walk on the side of the roads, some goats crossing the road, these type of things. Or maybe there's things that change last minute. For example, I raced African Continental Championships in Kenya just last year in October, and we had a time trial on a course with 50 speed bumps, and imagine being in your extensions going over these speed bumps. And so last minute, they decided to remove the speed bumps. So literally the day before the race, they're busy removing speed bumps, so that's just an example, how things happen in Africa. So I think it's going to be different. There's even things like you have to think about the water that you're drinking, even the food that you're eating, because if you're eating fresh food that's washed in the local water, it's quite likely to get stomach issues or to get a stomach bug. So yeah, there's some challenges, but in a way, I think it's a good thing because it gives riders like myself coming from Africa maybe a bit of an advantage at last, because we are a bit more accustomed to all these challenges that Africa pose. But it's going to be super special, and it's really important for cycling, for the future of cycling, for the growth of cycling globally, that these World Championships starts taking place in other parts of the world where it is a little bit more difficult and less accessible for cyclists. Unfortunately, at the moment, there is some unrest. Sorry about my dog barking. And in Rwanda, so there is talk of things having to change. I really have my fingers crossed. If nothing happens, I'm just going to let her out. That it actually does take place there, because I think it's going to be really, really, really special.
Oh my gosh, it's so funny hearing your dog bark. We have quite a few in our house, and I always have to
Yes, we
stash
have
them
two.
away before we start. But okay, so here we are, almost in the middle of February. The Worlds are far away. What is on your race program? What are your upcoming objectives to prepare not only to have a great season, but to prepare this World Championships towards the end of the year?
Yeah, so as I said, I've already been to Kigali. I've done my route recon. I've gotten familiarized myself with the route. So I think that's firstly really important. Visualization and being able to kind of picture the race. Throughout the year through key training sessions for myself is already important. So I have an advantage that I already have that ticked off. But yeah, next race up is Strade Bianche. So I'll have quite a busy spring campaign. I'm doing Strade Bianche. We have Villa and San Remo for the first time in many, many years for the women's peloton again this year. So I'm really looking forward to that. That's going to be really exciting. I'll be racing Tour of Flanders, and then my big focus for the spring campaign, so when I really, really want to be on good form, is the Ardennes Classics. Amstel, Flèche, Liège, Bastogne-Liège. Those will be my real target races for the spring. And then, interestingly enough, the women's peloton has the Volta a España in the beginning of May. So we come kind of directly out of the spring classics straight into a grand tour. So I'll also be taking part in that. And then, I have on my plan right now, I have in mind to be doing all 3 grand tours this year. So the Vuelta in May, the Giro in the beginning of July, and then the Tour at the end of July, early August, and then the World Champs in Kigali in Rwanda later in the year.
Well, that basically means starting middle of April, you don't need to train anymore. You just race, recover, right? There's so much racing. Holy smokes. How many days is the Vuelta for the women? 1 week?
So
8 days or something like
it's
that?
8 days. It's 8 days. So that's kind of the norm for women cycling at the moment. Well, we can't have, our grand tours can't be longer than 10 days. That's a UCI rule. I don't know when that's going to change. But it kind of makes it manageable to do all 3. I mean, to do all 3 as a male cyclist is pretty hard because, it's 3 weeks, each one of them. But for women cycling being 8 days, it's kind of digestible to do all 3.
Well, you're going to be busy. There's no doubt about that. Ashleigh, thank you so much for coming on the Odd Tandem today. It was great to speak with you, to get to know you, to learn a little bit about your business, your past, your opinion on the way that women's cycling has changed over the years. And we just wish you all the best in the upcoming World Championships in Africa, in Rwanda.
Thanks, Bobby. It's been really great chatting to you and Jens.
Thanks, guys, for listening to the podcast. There'll be a lot more content popping up here, including more great interviews with top guests like Ashleigh.
And please keep dropping your questions for us in the comments. And check our description below to find us on social media and Patreon to support our channel, like these great people.